I want you to picture something for me. You're 73 years old, sitting in your daughter's dining room in Charlotte, North Carolina. She's got her laptop open, angled toward you, and on the screen there's a slideshow. Not a vacation slideshow, a slideshow of assisted living facilities. Places with names like Brookdale Meadows and the Gardens at Providence Point. Photos of clean hallways, a woman in a cardigan doing a puzzle, a dining room with cloth napkins folded into little fans. "Mom," she says, "I just think it's time we start looking. Not today, not tomorrow, but we should have a plan." She says it gently. She says it because she loves me. And I believe that completely. But what I heard, sitting in that chair with my coffee going cold, was something else entirely. What I heard was, "We've already decided you're finished. My name is Linda Kessler. I'm 73 years old, and 10 months ago I sat in that dining room and nodded and said I'd think about it. Then I flew to Thailand, and I bought a house 200 feet from the Gulf of Thailand, and I have not thought about Brookdale Meadows one single day since. I want to tell you how a woman who had never once in her life made an impulsive decision, a woman who color-coded her filing cabinet for 30 years, ended up doing the single boldest thing of her entire life at 73. I'm 73 years old, and I bought a beach house instead of a spot in a facility. And some mornings, sitting on that porch with the water going gold in front of me, I think about that woman at the dining table with her coffee gone cold, and I want to reach back and tell her, it's not over. Go look at the water. You'll know. Thank you for sitting with an old woman and her story. If any part of this resonated with you, I'd genuinely appreciate a like and a subscribe. There are more stories like this one, and I think you'll find them worth your time. Take care of yourselves out there. And if you ever find yourself in Hua Hin, come find me on the beach road. I'll be the one with the grilled corn. That's real too. And if you're watching this and thinking about doing something similar, I want you to hear that part as clearly as you hear the beach sunsets. Get a good local attorney. Be suspicious of urgency and understand that the danger was never really the country. The danger was being new and being alone in being new. Both of those wear off if you let people in. But here is what I have now that I did not have sitting at that dining table. I have mornings I actually want to wake up for. I have a porch that faces the sunrise. I have a 9-year-old girl who draws me pictures and a 60-something dive shop owner's wife who taught me to make soup that makes my eyes water in the best possible way. I have a daughter who flies here for Christmas now instead of sending me PDFs of assisted living facilities. I have, for the first time since Frank died, a life that belongs entirely to me, built out of my own decisions instead of managed around other people's fears for me. If you're sitting somewhere right now, in your own dining room, looking at your own slideshow, being handed a future by people who love you, but who've quietly decided your story is mostly finished, I want to tell you what I wish someone had told me. Being cared for and being alive are not always the same thing. Sometimes the safest looking choice is actually just the choice that requires the least of everyone around you, including you. You are allowed to still be starting things. And then, almost as an afterthought, standing at the departure gate with her carry-on over her shoulder, she said, "Mom, I'm sorry about the slideshow." You don't have to be sorry. You loved me. You were scared. I know. But I was scared for the wrong reason. I was scared you'd become someone who needed to be managed. I never once considered you might become someone who was just starting again. I cried on the drive home. Good tears, the kind I hadn't had much practice with before all this. It's been 10 months now since I sat at Kat's dining table and looked at a slideshow of facilities with names like Brookdale Meadows, feeling the particular grief of realizing the people who loved me most had already started writing my ending. I am not going to tell you Thailand is paradise, because no honest person tells you that about anywhere. The heat in April is genuinely oppressive. The kind that makes you plan your entire day around avoiding the hours between 11 and 3. The bureaucracy around visa renewals is real and requires patience I did not know I still had. I miss autumn, actual crisp fall weather, in a way that catches me off guard sometimes, standing in 90-degree heat in what should be November. I miss being able to drive 4 hours and hug my daughter on short notice. That's a real loss, and I don't pretend otherwise. And I nearly lost a significant amount of money to a man who was good at reading exactly what a lonely new arrival wants to hear. I took her to Bangkok Hospital Hua Hin, walked her through the clean, quiet, English-speaking wing where I'd get care if I ever needed it, watched her ask an administrator a dozen careful, detail-oriented questions and get real, specific, reassuring answers to every one. I told her about Gary Sorensen. All of it in full, sitting on my porch on her third night, the water dark and loud beyond the little seawall. I watched her face go through something complicated vindication, fear retroactively confirmed, and then, slowly, something else. "You handled it," she said finally. "You didn't call me in a panic. You didn't need rescuing. You found the lawyer. You figured out the pattern. You reported it. You learned from it." I was scared. I told her. "I'm not saying I wasn't scared. I know. But you didn't fold. You didn't come home." She looked out at the water for a long moment. "I think I've been picturing you as someone who needed protecting, and you needed information. That's different than what I thought you needed." On her last evening, we sat on the porch with 2 glasses of white wine, and Ampai came by with a plate of mango sticky rice she'd made specifically because she'd heard Kat was visiting, and the 3 of us sat together as the sun went down, mostly quiet, the ordinary kind of quiet that doesn't need filling. Before she flew home, Kat said, "I looked up flights already for Christmas. Is that all right?" "That's more than all right," I said. "Rent on the leased land itself is minimal since I own the structure. Utilities run around $80, groceries, and eating out combined run under $300, and my international health insurance policy, which I consider absolutely non-negotiable, runs about $140 a month. Compare that to what a single month at Sunrise Terrace would have cost. The brochure Kat showed me listed a starting rate of $200 a month for a 1-bedroom unit, and the math isn't close. Though I want to be honest that the math was never actually the point. The math is just the thing that makes the point possible. Kat came to visit 5 months after the scam, 7 months after I'd moved. She'd resisted for a long time, and I understood why, and I never pushed. She landed in Bangkok looking exhausted and wary in exactly the way I probably had on my own first arrival, and the drive down to Hua Hin was mostly quiet, both of us watching rice paddies go by out the window. I'd planned the visit carefully, the way I once planned Thanksgiving dinners. I wanted her to see the whole texture of it, not just the beach. I took her to the market to meet Mei Lek. I took her to the tutoring program, where Fawn, entirely unprompted, informed Kat with great seriousness that I was the best grandmother teacher, which is not even technically accurate since I'm not her grandmother at all, but Kat's eyes went wet anyway, standing in that temple courtyard. And who now hands me my order before I've said a word, the same way that coffee shop girl did for Richard in Cebu, the same small ritual of being known that seems to exist everywhere in this part of the world in a way I'd almost forgotten was possible. I volunteer twice a week at a small English language tutoring program run out of a local temple, working with children whose families want them fluent for the tourism economy. There's a girl named Fawn, maybe 9, who has decided I am something like a grandmother to her, and who brings me drawings that I have started keeping in a drawer, the way I once kept Kat's drawings from kindergarten. I've made friends among the expat community, a widowers and widows lunch group that meets on Thursdays, mostly British and Australian, a few other Americans, all of us circling the same questions from different angles, all of us finding that the questions get easier once you're not asking them alone. And I've made friends among the Thai community too, which took longer and meant more. Ampai and I cook together some Sunday afternoons. She is teaching me tom yum properly this time, with the spice level I actually asked for, and I am teaching her, with far less success, how to make a pot roast, which she regards with the polite bewilderment of someone being shown a genuinely strange foreign custom, which I suppose it is. My monthly expenses run to about $150. I finally told Kat the whole story on a video call about 3 weeks after it happened, once the shame had settled into something closer to a lesson I could actually talk about. I expected her to say, essentially, I told you so. She didn't. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, Mom, thank you for telling me. I know that wasn't easy. And then, after another pause, I'm glad you had someone there. I'm glad it wasn't just you against it. That was the first conversation since the dining room slideshow where I felt like she was actually listening to who I was becoming, instead of measuring me against who she was afraid I might stop being. By the 6-month mark, the fear had mostly burned off, replaced by something quieter and much better, an actual life, with an actual rhythm, the kind you only notice you have once you're standing inside it. I wake around 6 without an alarm because the light changes early here and my body has simply adjusted. I make 1 cup of coffee, still just 1. Some habits from grief don't fully leave. They just stop hurting the way they used to, and I take it out to the porch and watch the fishing boats. 3 mornings a week I walk the beach road to a market stall run by a woman everyone calls May Lek, who sells fruit, dragon fruit, rambutan, small sweet bananas. Do you have any idea what happens to older Americans who get scammed overseas? And I thought, with a kind of sick clarity, that she'd been right to worry, even if she hadn't known the specific shape the worry would take. I did not tell her. Not right away. I sat with it for almost 2 weeks, ashamed, second-guessing everything, wondering if I'd made a catastrophic mistake dressed up as a beautiful one. What pulled me out of it, oddly, was Ampai. I hadn't told her the details, only that I'd had a bad week, and she showed up at my door one evening with more tom yum and sat with me on my unfinished porch, and when I finally told her the bones of what had happened, she nodded slowly and said something that has stayed with me since. This happens, she said, not because you are foolish. Because you are new, and new people are easy to see from far away. It gets harder to see you once you are not new anymore. You will not be new for very long. I asked her what she meant. You will have neighbors who know you. You will have a shopkeeper who knows your face. Once people know you, the ones who prey on strangers cannot find you the same way. You have to survive being new. That is the whole thing. I reported Gary Sorensen to the local expat association and learned within days that I was not his first target, and that 2 other complaints had already been filed that month alone. He left Hua Hin not long after, presumably for some other town of new arrivals. It wasn't stupidity. It was loneliness dressed up as opportunity. I had just uprooted my entire life. I was proud of myself in a fragile, unpracticed way, and some part of me wanted to prove to Kat, to myself, to the ghost of every doubt anyone had ever had about me, that I could not just survive here but thrive, that I could spot a good deal and move on it like someone who belonged here. I told Preecha, my attorney, about it almost as an afterthought, mentioning it at the end of an unrelated call about my house registration paperwork. There was a silence on the line that told me everything before he said a word. Linda, he said, do not send that man anything. Do not meet him again without telling me first. He explained patiently that this was an extremely common pattern, not a wild, cartoonish scam, but a slow, relationship-based con, specifically targeting recently arrived retirees who had cash on hand, who were eager to prove their competence, and who hadn't yet built the local network that would let them fact-check a stranger's story. The family needing cash, the below-market price, the urgency to wire funds before a broker got involved. Every element was a recognizable piece of a very old machine. I felt something close to shame, sitting in my half-furnished living room with my folding table and my one frying pan, realizing how close I'd come. I thought about Kat's folder. I thought about her question. I need to tell you about the worst 3 weeks of this entire experience, because I promised you honesty, and because I think what happened here is exactly the kind of thing Kat had been afraid of, and I want to be fair to her fear even while explaining why I still don't regret any of this. About 5 weeks after I moved in, while I was still waiting on my shipping container, still living out of suitcases, still finding my footing, I was approached by a man who introduced himself at a local coffee shop as a fellow expat, an American named Gary Sorensen, who said he'd been in Hua Hin for almost a decade and ran a small property consulting business, helping newcomers navigate exactly the kind of leasehold questions I was dealing with. He was charming in the specific way that con men are charming, which is to say, he was charming in a way calibrated precisely to what a lonely, slightly overwhelmed new arrival wants to hear. He knew things, real things, accurate details about local regulations, names of actual government offices, which made everything he said land with more credibility than it deserved. Over the course of about 10 days, across several friendly coffee meetings, he told me about an opportunity, a beachfront lot 2 kilometers south, being sold below market by a Thai family who needed cash quickly, that he could get me access to before it went to a broker, if I moved fast, if I wired a deposit to hold my place in line. I want to be honest about why I nearly did it. Called Soy 78, off the main beach road, close enough to the water that I could hear it at night through the bedroom window, a small covered porch facing east, so that I'd get the sunrise over the water every single morning without having to go anywhere for it. I moved in with 2 suitcases and a shipping container's worth of belongings that wouldn't arrive for another 6 weeks, and for those 6 weeks I lived, essentially, like a woman camping in her own life. A mattress, a folding table, a single frying pan I bought at the local Tesco Lotus, and more contentment than I'd had in 3 years of a fully furnished house back in Ohio. My neighbor on one side was a Thai woman named Ampai, in her 60s, whose husband ran a small dive shop further down the beach road. She appeared at my door within the first week holding a plastic container of something that smelled extraordinary, and said, in careful English, "You are new. This is Tom Yum. Not too spicy. I made it not too spicy for you." It was, in fact, plenty spicy for a woman raised on Ohio casseroles, and I ate it anyway, eyes watering, and told her it was wonderful, and she laughed and patted my hand the exact same way the corn vendor had on my very first evening in town, and I understood, sitting there with my eyes streaming, that I had stumbled into something particular about this place, a default setting of warmth toward strangers that I hadn't experienced. Not really, not like this, since I was a child. I don't have 40 more years to get around to it. She didn't have a response to that. Neither of us said much else that visit. She left Sunday morning without the warmth our goodbyes usually carried, and I stood in the driveway and watched her car go and felt, for the first time in the whole process, something closer to doubt than conviction. I closed on the house in February. I want to walk through the actual mechanics of it, because I think anyone considering something like this deserves the unglamorous truth, not just the beach sunsets. I'd hired a Thai-British attorney recommended by Margaret, a man named Preacha, who specialized in foreign property transactions, and he walked me through the leasehold structure. 30-year lease on the underlying land, renewable for 2 additional 30-year terms under the specific agreement we structured. With the house structure itself, the actual physical building registered in my name outright, which Thai law permits even when the land beneath it is leased. It is, I want to be honest, a more complicated arrangement than simply buying a house in America, and I do not think anyone should attempt it without a good local attorney, because the protections exist, but you have to know to ask for them. I flew back in February, alone again, to sign the final papers and take possession. The house sat on a quiet soi, a side street. I apologized for the lie, and I meant the apology, but I did not apologize for the decision, and I think that distinction confused her at first, because in our family those two things had always traveled together. If you'd done something that upset someone, you apologized for the thing itself, not just for how you'd handled telling them. She called her husband, Ben, that night, and by the following weekend she'd driven up with a folder, an actual physical folder, printed pages, outlining everything that could go wrong. Mom, you don't know anyone there. You don't speak the language. What happens if you fall? What happens if there's a medical emergency and it takes us 20 hours to get to you? What if you get scammed? Do you have any idea what happens to older Americans who buy property overseas without knowing what they're doing? That last question landed harder than she knew, because some small, quiet part of me had been worrying about exactly that, and I hadn't said it out loud to anyone yet, including myself. I told her I understood her fear. I told her I'd done real research, that I had a lawyer helping with the leasehold agreement, that I had health insurance that would extend internationally, that I wasn't being reckless. She said, very quietly, "You're 73, Mom. This isn't the time in your life to be starting over from nothing in a country you visited for 2 weeks." I said, "Catherine, this is exactly the time." A woman named Knock, who'd shown me 2 properties on that first trip, and told her I wanted to make an offer on a small house I'd seen near a neighborhood called Khao Takyab, 200 feet or so from the beach, modest, 2 bedrooms, a small covered porch facing the waterside. The asking price was roughly $94,000. I had that between what Frank's life insurance had left me and the sale of our second car, and a chunk of savings that had otherwise been sitting doing nothing useful in a money market account, earning less interest than a Thai grilled corn cart makes in profit margin. I put the house on the market. My house, the brick one with the magnolia tree, 3 weeks later. That's when everything hit the fan. Kat found out because she came by to drop off a casserole dish she'd borrowed months earlier and saw the realtor's sign in my yard. She didn't yell. Kat has never once yelled at me in her life. She went quiet in a way that was somehow louder than yelling would have been, and she said, "Mom, what is this?" I told her the truth, all at once, the way you rip off a bandage. I was selling the house. I was moving to Thailand. I'd already found a place. I'd already been there. She sat down at my kitchen table like her legs had simply stopped participating in the conversation. "You went to Thailand, alone, and you told me you went to Charleston." I toured actual houses, too. Small, single-story beach bungalows a short walk from the water, structured under the leasehold arrangements I'd read about. 30-year lease on the land, renewable, with the house itself owned outright. I met a British expat named Margaret at a coffee shop who'd lived in Hua Hin for 6 years after her husband passed, and she told me, without my even fully asking, the first year is hard and lonely no matter what anyone tells you, but it's a different kind of hard than the hard you're leaving. It's hard because it's new, not hard because it's empty. I wrote that down in the Notes app on my phone. I still have it. I visited Bangkok Hospital Hua Hin, a private hospital with an international patient department. Clean and modern, English spoken fluently by every staff member I encountered. I asked, somewhat sheepishly, what a general consultation cost. The answer was around 800 baht, roughly $22. I thought about my Medicare supplement premium back home and said nothing, because I honestly didn't trust my own voice for a second. By the end of the 10 days, I hadn't bought anything. But I'd stopped asking myself if. I'd started asking myself how. I flew home. I did not tell Kat where I'd actually been. I sat with it for 6 weeks, made an actual pros and cons list on a yellow legal pad the way Frank used to do for every major purchase we ever made, and then I called a realtor back in Hua Hin. An older Thai woman selling grilled corn from a cart nearby noticed me, I think, because she came over not with alarm, just gently, and said something I didn't understand, and then, seeing I didn't understand, simply smiled and held out a piece of corn, wrapped in paper, and gestured that it was a gift, not a sale. I took it. I said thank you, the only Thai I knew at that point, Kob Kun Ka, which I'd practiced on the plane. She beamed and patted my arm and went back to her cart, and I sat down right there on the sand in my traveling clothes and ate grilled corn and watched the sun finish setting over the Gulf of Thailand, and I thought, I could live here. Not visit. Live. I spent the next 10 days doing something I hadn't done since my working years. I made lists, I made appointments, I treated the trip like a project with deliverables, because that is who I am and grief hadn't changed it. It had just redirected it towards something that felt, for the first time in years, like it belonged to a future instead of managing a past. I visited 4 different real estate offices along Narasdamri Road, the strip near the old fishing pier. I toured condominiums, a 1-bedroom unit in a development called Bon Sanploen, foreigner-owned quota available, sea view partial, asking price the equivalent of about 78.0, which stopped me cold, because a comparable view in Charlotte wasn't a number I could say out loud without laughing. Then I took a car south to Hua Hin, arranged through the hotel I'd booked, a 3-hour drive that took me past rice paddies and roadside stands selling what I'd later learn was grilled sticky rice with coconut, wrapped in banana leaves. I arrived in Hua Hin in the late afternoon, and my driver dropped me at a small hotel 2 blocks from the beach road, and I remember standing on the sidewalk with my suitcase, jet-lagged and sweating through my blouse, thinking, Linda, what on earth have you done? And then I walked the 2 blocks to the water. I want to try to describe this properly, because it's the moment everything else in this story hangs on. The beach in Hua Hin isn't dramatic the way postcards of Thailand sometimes suggest. It's a long, wide crescent of pale sand, horses being led along the shoreline by their owners for tourist rides, a scattering of beach umbrellas in faded stripes, fishing boats painted turquoise and yellow bobbing further out. The sun was starting to go down, throwing that particular gold light across the water that photographs never quite capture correctly, and I stood there in my sweat-through blouse with my suitcase handle still in my hand, and I started to cry, right there on a public beach, in front of strangers, in a way I had not cried since Frank's funeral. Not from sadness, from something closer to relief, like some part of me had been holding its breath for 3 years and had just, finally, been given permission to let it out. 4 months in, I did something that still, looking back, strikes me as the real turning point more than anything that came after. I booked a solo trip. 2 weeks. Bangkok, then down to Hua Hin. I told Kat I was going on a trip with my church group to Charleston. I am not proud of that lie. I want to say that plainly. But I also knew with total certainty that if I told her the truth, the trip would become a negotiation instead of a decision, and I needed, just once, to make a decision without a committee. I flew out of Charlotte in October, with a layover in Tokyo, nearly 20 hours of total travel time, and by the time I landed at Suvarnabhumi Airport, outside Bangkok, I had crossed some threshold of exhaustion where my body simply stopped complaining and went along with things. The heat outside the airport hit me the way I imagine walking into a greenhouse might: thick, immediate, faintly sweet with something I couldn't identify, which I later learned was frangipani blossom mixed with exhaust and street food, and the ocean somewhere underneath all of it, even though the ocean wasn't visible yet. I spent 2 nights in Bangkok, mostly disoriented, mostly overwhelmed by the traffic and the noise and the sheer unfamiliar density of everything, tuk-tuks weaving between cars, temples with gold spires rising up between office towers, street vendors frying something on every corner that smelled better than anything I'd cooked in a decade, the non-immigrant OA and later the OX, which is a longer-term option for retirees who can show a certain amount in savings or a monthly income requirement. I learned that Thailand doesn't let foreigners own land outright, but that there were legal structures, leasehold arrangements, or buying a house while leasing the land beneath it, or purchasing a condominium unit outright, which foreigners can do freely under Thai law as long as the foreign ownership quota in that particular building hasn't been reached. I learned about Hua Hin specifically almost by accident, the way you learn about most things that end up mattering. A woman in the Facebook group, screen name Sunny Expat Sue, posted long, detailed accounts of her life there, a beach town on the Gulf of Thailand, about 3 hours south of Bangkok, historically the place where the Thai royal family had their own seaside palace, which had made it into a genteel, established resort town rather than the louder backpacker circuit further south. She described mornings walking the beach before the heat set in, a night market 3 streets from her condo, a hospital system with English-speaking staff, and costs that made her laugh, she said, actual out-loud laughing, when she compared them to her old Medicare supplement bills. I read her posts the way I used to read Frank's old letters from before we were married, repeatedly, looking for something underneath the words. Retiring abroad on a fixed income. I don't know what I expected. What I got was 3 hours of reading that ended somewhere around 2 in the morning, with 17 browser tabs open and a feeling in my chest I hadn't had in longer than I could remember. It wasn't excitement, not yet. It was more like permission. Like discovering there was a door in a room I'd assumed only had walls. I did not tell Kat. I did not tell Carol. I did not tell anyone for nearly 4 months, and I want to explain why, because I think it matters. If I'd said it out loud to another person, they would have had an opinion about it before I'd even finished forming my own. And I needed, for the first time since Frank died, maybe for the first time in my adult life, to have a thought that belonged entirely to me before anyone else got to weigh in on it. So I researched in private, the way some people might have an affair in private, if I can be forgiven the comparison. It felt a little like that. A little illicit. A little thrilling in a way I was embarrassed by and also wasn't going to give up. I read expat forums. I joined a Facebook group called Americans Retiring in Thailand, using a profile photo of a sunflower instead of my actual face, because some deep instinct told me to keep this compartmentalized for a while longer. I learned about the Thai retirement visa. Kat walked me through the amenities, the on-site nursing staff, the dining hall with 3 meal options daily, the activities calendar, water aerobics on Tuesdays, a book club, a visiting chaplain. She'd done real research. Spreadsheets, even Be Still My Heart. My daughter had made me a spreadsheet, comparing costs, distances from her house, ratings from families. Everything except the one column that mattered. She never once asked me what I wanted. Not because she was being cruel, because it genuinely hadn't occurred to her that there was a question to ask. In her mind, the question had already been settled by the facts. I was a widow. I was 72 at the time. I lived alone. And alone plus widow plus 72 equals plan needed. I told her I'd think about it. I meant it kindly. I did not mean I would do it. That night, after she'd gone to bed in her old room, I sat at that same dining table with her laptop closed in front of me, and instead of thinking about Sunrise Terrace, I found myself thinking about something entirely unrelated. A man at my church, Harold Ferris, had mentioned a few months earlier that his sister had retired to somewhere in Southeast Asia. He hadn't been specific, and I hadn't been especially interested at the time, filing it away the way you file away most things people tell you at church coffee hour. But now, at 11 at night, alone in my kitchen, I found myself opening my own laptop and typing something I'd never typed before. If nobody was watching, and nobody needed anything from me, and there was no one left to disappoint, what would I actually want? The answer surprised me, because it wasn't an answer I recognized as belonging to me. I wanted warmth. I wanted water I could see from a window. I wanted to stop being someone people worried about and start being someone who simply lived somewhere. It didn't happen all at once, and I want to be honest about that, because I think people assume a decision like this arrives like lightning. It doesn't. It arrives slowly, through 100 small conversations, until one day you notice you've already decided and you're just catching up to yourself. The slideshow moment, the one I opened with, happened about 8 months after Frank died. Kat had driven up for the weekend, ostensibly to help me go through some of Frank's things in the garage, which we did, and it was hard, and we cried over a toolbox, of all things. But that evening after dinner, she opened her laptop at the dining table with the particular brightness of someone who has rehearsed how they're going to bring something up. I found some places, she said, just to look at. No pressure. And there they were. Brookdale, the gardens at Providence Point, a place called Sunrise Terrace that had a photo of a woman my age laughing with a bingo card, and I remember looking at that photo and thinking, that woman looks like she's performing being happy for a camera crew. It wasn't sadness exactly. I'd done sadness. I'd sat with a grief counselor named Dr. Everett for 8 months and done the actual work of it. This was different. It was more like discovering that the shape of my days had been built entirely around a person who was no longer in them, and now I was just moving through the outline of a life that didn't have anything left inside it. I'd wake at 6:15 because that's when Frank used to get up for his route, decades after he'd retired from it. I'd make exactly 1 cup of coffee in a machine built for 2. I'd sit in my chair, not his chair, mine, but somehow it felt like sitting in half of something, and read the paper, and by 10 o'clock I'd have run out of reasons to be anywhere. I started finding tasks, reorganizing the pantry, cleaning gutters that didn't need cleaning, driving to the Kroger for things I didn't need, just to have somewhere to be for 45 minutes. My neighbor Carol, who'd lived across the street for 11 years, asked me to lunch one Saturday. We went to the same diner we'd been going to for years. I ordered the same tuna melt I always ordered. Halfway through, Carol put her fork down and said, "Linda, honey, where do you go? You're sitting right here and you're somewhere else." I told her I was fine. That night I sat in my chair again, always my chair, and asked myself something I hadn't let myself ask in a long time, if I could do anything at all. It was slow, almost 18 months of hospital visits and medication adjustments, and a hospital bed eventually moved into our own living room, which is its own particular kind of grief, watching a man shrink in the room where you raised your daughter. After the funeral, people bring casseroles. That's a real thing, and it's a kind thing, and it also stops. Within a few months, the casseroles stopped, and the phone calls from neighbors thinned out, and it was just me and a house that had 2 people's worth of furniture, and only one person's worth of noise. Kat lived 4 hours away in Charlotte. She called every Sunday, without fail, and I loved her for it, and I also started to notice something in her voice that I couldn't quite name at first. It took me a while to place it. It was the voice you use with someone you're monitoring. "How's your blood pressure, Mom? Are you still driving at night? Did you remember to get the furnace serviced?" I understood where it came from. Kat had lost her father, and she was terrified of losing me too, and the only tool she had for managing that terror was information. Knowing everything, tracking everything, staying one step ahead of any possible disaster. I recognized it because it's exactly the kind of person I'd raised her to be. I'd built spreadsheets my whole life. She'd learned it from me. I just hadn't expected to be the line item. About a year after Frank passed, I started noticing something in myself too. And I want to tell you about the 3 weeks in the middle of it when I thought I'd lost everything, and what it taught me about the difference between being careful and being alive. But I have to start at the beginning, because none of it makes sense unless you understand where I was standing when it started. I grew up in Ohio, Mansfield, if that means anything to you, and I spent 34 years working as a bookkeeper and then an office manager for a mid-sized furniture manufacturer. Not glamorous work. Steady work. I balanced ledgers before we had software that did it for you. I knew every vendor by name and every late payment by heart. I married Frank Kessler when I was 23. He drove a delivery route for the same company, which is how we met. He used to leave the invoices on my desk with a little smiley face drawn in the corner, which I found ridiculous and, eventually, irresistible. We were married 49 years. We raised one daughter, Catherine, Kat, we called her, and we built a modest life in a modest brick house with a magnolia tree in the front yard that Frank planted the year Kat was born. We took 2 vacations a year, always to the same lake in Michigan. We had routines so deep they'd worn grooves into the days. Frank died 3 years ago. Congestive heart failure. Not fast like some of these stories you hear,